Hello, everybody, and that was a terrible fade on my part. Welcome to the second episode of Empire and Exile podcast. We are recording here a couple days before this goes live, but tonight's topic is Ask a Statist. So, as the resident person who thinks a nation state is a good idea, Josh is going to essentially put my statist credentials on trial. I have not gotten any of these questions in advance. He says he's got about 20 of them written down. And we will go from there. So with that in mind, how's it going tonight, Josh?
I'm good, man. I'm good. Don't sell yourself short on that intro. It wasn't so bad.
Well,
you're doing all right.
No, well, you couldn't hear the terrible fade I did.
They didn't even know I couldn't hear it.
I'll go fix it in post. No, I'm kidding. I do have that level of skill. I just don't have that level of care.
I hear you, buddy.
With that being said, I didn't get these questions in advance, and I am not a philosophy major, so you're not going to hear me quoting philosopher X, Y, and Z says such and such, so this is why. I'm not that guy. I don't have that that formal or informal education. Don't look for that from me. This if that's what you want, this is not the podcast for you. So with that in mind, Josh, do your worst.
Okay, you know what? And hey, Dorf, thank you. Dorf has agreed to this podcast idea because he is a proud statist, and I give him credit for acknowledging that or admitting that, because a lot of people like to pretend they're not while still supporting everything that statism is. They still like to support but they will still get offended when you call them a statist. But not Dorf. He admits it. He wears it like a badge of honor, and I do appreciate that. And I'm going to ask these questions to Dorf directly. But truly, this isn't just meant to for me to get my jollies off by putting Dorf on the spot. That's not really what this show is about. When I ask these questions that we are going to, some we'll discuss, a little bit at length, some we're just going to throw out there. I want the people listening to ask themselves these questions as well, and to just intellectually, honestly answer them. That, even if it's just in your own head, because I do think it's important. And pretty much all the questions here are going to start the same way. You could almost say that, yes, it's 20 questions, but really it's only one question, and I'm just changing the suffix, if you will.
Sure.
Because basically every question here is going to be, what level of violence is acceptable for, and fill in the blank. Because let's be honest, let's be real. I think libertarians, anarchists, anti-statists need to come clean with a lot of the faults or issues, pragmatic difficulties, if you will, of their own ideology. I try to do that. I try to be honest with my own ideology, but that goes the other way as well. And I think there's a lot of people out there that are simply statists because they have never considered an alternative. They were born into a system, and they champion said system because they can't think of a better way and because their life is decent. So as we continue on with these questions, I also want to say, especially to you, Dorf, and to the people listening at home, some of these questions are going to lend themselves more to you're answering for the whole state. You're answering for the nation, if you will. How is it possible for the nation to react to this? And some are going to be more geared towards an individual operator, officer, member of a statist society. Does that make sense?
Okay, so I'm not asking, we could even say that, correct me if I'm wrong here, much like we did our last episode 1 there is, if I was king for a day, I could answer as if I was the king of the society, or do you want me to answer as if I was, just... I get what you're saying. I'll answer it in the way you've asked.
I think in most cases you're going to understand what is the better way to answer.
Sure.
But there isn't a wrong way to answer either, by any means, and some will cross reference with each other. So I'll get started, and feel free to take it in whatever direction it goes. But what level of violence is acceptable for? I'm going to throw you for a loop here a little bit, because I feel like you're waiting for me to try to get you with a gotcha question, and they're not all gotchas. So what?
So you're admitting there's some.
Oh, for sure. There's a healthy amount. But what level of violence is acceptable for an invasion of territory? Your territory, your territory has been invaded.
Okay, from a state perspective, level of violence allowed. Okay, so a legitimate act of invasion, I would say, is in advancement of either. This is more of a classical view of warfare in general. Wars for the longest time and still to this day are fought over resources. If you have a conglomeration of people, that being a nation state, and there's a shortage of necessary resources unattainable by other means, I would, and are absolutely necessary to advancement of your goals as a people, using violence or force, I do see as a legitimate use of force. You can also, I would also say that, I am not, necessarily okay with offensive wars as a person. I do see them as a legitimate power of a nation state. Defensive wars are preemptive strikes are also legitimate uses of force from my perspective.
Okay, so in an invasion of territory, your territory has been invaded. You possess a nation. The invasion, someone else is invading your territory that you've made it very clear is yours.
Okay.
The acceptable level of violence is death, right?
Well, yeah, exactly. If that's the way you want that answered, yes.
Okay, and I will, I'm not trying to be the statist here, but isn't that even true amongst or within your own home? You have the right to defend your own
absolutely
home. So,
absolutely.
you're just simply a civilian, and someone has invaded your territory, right?
Absolutely. And there's another recently current event here that's a primary example. There was a no-knock raid of a house recently. They were at the wrong house. And the homeowner shot and I don't believe they killed a police officer, but shot and injured a police officer and was eventually gunned down themselves by the raiding police. They were at the wrong home. I forget the exact details here. I wasn't expecting this question, otherwise I had it ready. I would say that is a legitimate use of force by the by the homeowner. I don't remember if they were owner, tenant, or whatever, but that would be a legitimate use of force. Someone, first off, no knock raids are bullshit. Secondly,
certainly,
the fact that you came, legally owned, legally possessed firearm within the laws of the United States, was used in what, in all other words, it was essentially in the heat of the moment likely determined as a burglary because someone kicked your door down in the middle of the night, and just start screaming at you, screaming. So what do you expect? I would have probably done the exact same thing if I was in that scenario. And unfortunately, this gentleman lost his.
Are they here to kill you, to rape you, to steal your stuff, to, who knows?
Yeah, very, very much a big fan and legitimate defender of you would more colloquially known as castle doctrine. Your house is your castle, and you can defend it to the death if necessary against illegitimate invasion. Let's call it.
Sure. No, and that is.
But if we're getting it like the state, going back to like the state level action though, if we're talking, warfare for gain, if you should be willing to take it as a nation state, as well as defend it up to the point, including the point of death, and I would deem that a legitimate action, whether it be resources, territory, way of life, et cetera, et cetera.
Okay. These next two are going to be kind of related, but what level of violence is acceptable for? This should be an easy one. For the killing of civilians, the killing of free people. Definitely death back. I don't mean.
Are you talking? So, are you asking specifically in like warfare? Are civilians fair game? Is that what you're asking?
No. I'm asking civilians have been killed. What is the acceptable retaliation?
Okay. All right. So if your civilians are killed by a third party, what is an acceptable retaliation? I be more specific here so I can answer it a little better. Are you talking as what's an acceptable reaction as a nation or as an individual or as a if your civilians are killed, are you allowed to kill civilians in warfare? What are you asking?
No, are just simply what level of violence is acceptable towards the ones who did it. Now, the killing of civilians could be, they killed your little brother who lives in your house, and in the micro, or it could be, somebody just crashed a plane into your building.
Okay, so in the micro, so the whole eye for an eye makes the whole world blind thing. This is one of the reasons that I legitimately view a state as a good thing. It's the monopolization of legitimate violence. I forget which. That is my one bit of philosophy I'm going to bring here. I forget who said it, but I got that from somewhere. That ain't mine. The idea, the runaway cycle of retaliatory violence on a micro level is not conducive to a peaceful and prosperous society. Allowing a third party, such as a state, to essentially handle that, so you're not, it's not it doesn't turn in constantly to an eye for an eye scenario, where there's other remedies such as imprisonment, fines, or other state police power. That is more conducive and more effective at producing a stable society and a just outcome for all. There's plenty of times we've seen, even through the modern era, where somebody is wrongfully accused, and thankfully in most of the time in the United States, all it is reputational ruin, and that can be recovered. Whereas if all of a sudden, Jim Bob's a witch here, and we don't realize that so-and-so was just saying that for their own gain, in order to potentially eliminate a rival, and all of a sudden we realize after we've hung the witch that they're dead, that is not a good outcome, and that would just cause further retribution going on, in theory a forever cycle, or till we're out of bodies. And from a macro perspective, warfare perspective, it's an unfortunate thing when civilians are killed in warfare. Generally speaking, it can happen more frequently than I'm sure that we know. It happens more frequently than I'm sure that we know, and it's an unfortunate outcome. But to avoid civilian casualties, might as well not even, there is no active warfare where you can essentially, avoid civilian casualties in the modern era, because you don't meet, armies don't meet on battlefields anymore. They meet wherever and whenever, wherever.
Okay, and I'm setting the stage here, Dorf, and I'm not trying to use you as a guinea pig. I'm setting the stage here to say that there are moral justifications for basic ideas whether it's done by the state or done by an individual. That, you know, that there is just retribution for things that basically trump the idea of who does it. You know, that right is right and wrong is wrong.
Sure.
I guess is what I'm trying to say. And so far, I think, you know, we're playing into that. And that doesn't necessarily mean that just because I think that it's rock solid fact or truth. But okay, what level of violence is acceptable for the taking of resources? Somebody took your stuff. You know, somebody took your stuff. Somebody came in, you know, another nation came in, another superpower came in, took over your land and started taking your oil, or somebody stole your candy bar. You know, I mean,
as I explained in from the macro perspective in question 1, I think if resources strategic for your needs are unattainable in other ways, I do believe state warfare is a legitimate way to go get them. Up to, and like I said, up into, and you know, not even just occupation to force a client-state relationship, but conquering. We haven't, as a world, gone to war to conquer people in, you know, God, almost 100 years now. But that was not the way the world worked until very recently. From a micro perspective, similar to my answer in question 2, that runaway cycle of retribution that I'd like to avoid, somebody takes your stuff seeking remedy through a third party, such as a court, law enforcement, or other state action, where the state has that, but once again, the monopolization of legitimate violence, where they can take it back for you on your behalf. You know, if this was stuff like physical goods, for enforced payment of monetary damages to cover the loss. From a micro perspective, I am not a. Unfortunately, I'm cornering myself here into I'm cool with might makes right from a macro perspective, but not micro, and I acknowledge that. That is another. The only reason might doesn't make right in any system is out of, some might argue, a misplaced sense of guilt. But any system, whether it's extreme anarchy or extreme statism, has the potential to devolve into right makes right, might makes right. I just think it's more avoidable from a micro or from a macro perspective in a state-based system.
Okay. And I would like to point out that one of the things in question is this idea that we know that the state has a monopoly on violence, but whether we
legitimate violence, it has a monopoly on legitimate violence.
No, this is what I was going to say. We know that the state has a monopoly on violence. The idea that the state has a monopoly on legitimate violence is up for philosophical debate.
Sure.
Whether or not there is any legitimate violence is the,
and I think that would be the root of our disagreement here, and why I love libertarian philosophy from a perspective of, yeah, this sounds great, but I just struggle with the road to get there, and I just don't think that the promised land is attainable in a purely libertarian or anarcho system. That's I love the theory. I just realize I don't think we as humans will ever get there.
No, and that is, I think a lot of people feel that way, Dorf. I would argue, and perhaps we should argue it on a different show, but I would argue that when you have a theory that is so good, you need to work towards achieving it, or at least at the very least one needs to work towards getting close to it.
Yeah, at the expense of sounding like
when
Mr. Stalin here and arguing for a permanent revolution. Yes, I would like state action to be taking steps each and every day in the libertarian or direction. Just the practical reality of the game, let's call it, doesn't make that available at all times, because it, unfortunately, lots of steps along the way there put the macro the macro at extreme risk to those who aren't playing the same game, and because of that, as we've seen, a perfect example of very recently with these lockdowns here, that was steps in very much the wrong direction. But based on the information at the time that you had in late February, early March, I understood it was a horrific violation of rights to essentially lock the healthy at home. But with the information available at the time, I was like, all right, well, couple weeks. I this sucks, but I guess we got to do it. Whereas now there's no fucking excuse anymore. Outside of like 3 counties in the entire country, there's no excuse.
I agree with you. I do agree with you. And I would simply say from a philosophical perspective that when an idea is labeled as utopic and said that, well, it's utopic, but we can't get there, then any step away from that is a terrible misstep. Then you simply, to acknowledge that something is utopic is to say, we know what the prize is, although it's, unattainable as it may be, we know what the prize is. So to then move away from that prize is ignorant.
Okay.
Would be my thing. Would be my thing. My next one was going to be the advancement of the further 3, but I think you've answered that.
I've kind of answered that each time.
Yeah, we went pretty in depth there. Okay, here's a real easy one. Perhaps it's an easy one for anyone out there listening. What level of violence is acceptable for murder? Someone is murdering people.
Okay, from a micro perspective, it is a legitimate power of the state and legitimate expectation of members of the state that if that is happening, that is a legitimate duty of the state to deal with that, to take care of it, whether it's through apprehension and imprisonment, after legitimate trial through a court of law, or of violent elimination of the threat to greater society, if apprehension is unavailable. That is a legitimate form. From a macro perspective, let's look at. I would use let's use the Osama bin Laden example. It was a perfectly legitimate action of a state to. You could say it, legally speaking, extrajudicially kill Osama bin Laden. I don't think anybody cried about that day. That doesn't make it philosophically correct, but that is a legitimate state action that somebody runs an organization hostile to you and is done harm to you and yours. That is a legitimate action of the state to do what they did and helicopter into Pakistan and kick his door down.
Yeah, Dorf, I actually would argue that, well, this is definitely a different topic, but if assuming that the stories we've been told about Osama bin Laden were true, that the state killing Osama bin Laden is certainly justifiable. I actually do say that. And I guess
even from just a practicality standpoint, yeah, sure. I'm sure they could have taken him. But the not ending him then and there, retaliatory action there, the potential for retaliatory action, specifically terrorism, was too much greater in an attempt to get him released or save him or some other fashion, was too great. And there's a reason that they pumped him full of lead and threw his body into the ocean. They didn't want it to be recoverable, so all of a sudden his death is a martyrdom museum. The place where he's buried turns into a martyrdom museum, and that's adversarial to your even longer term goals of preventing adversarial relationships with other non-state actors throughout the world.
Okay, so I mean, I think most people agree that when you have someone out there murdering someone, then something needs to be done, right? I mean, there's John Wayne Gacy's and Jeffrey Dahmer's in this world. We got to do something about those, right?
Well, here's the thing that I think you may be surprised here. From a internal policy perspective, I don't think the state should be allowed to put one of its own citizens to death under any circumstances. Through the justice system, I don't think there should be a death penalty. The reason I say that is, specifically in the United States, the court system is made up, 12 angry men and imperfect people rendering a final and irreversible judgment. Even though there is too great of a potential to get it wrong, where there's no option for whoops, my bad. Here's your freedom and some compensation to make up for your time you spent unjustly in jail. I don't care if the people are caught in the act, they admit to it, and it's on camera. I don't think that it is a legitimate power of the state to, through the judicial system, sentence someone to death. Life, and and then you get to a practical perspective within the system of the United States. It's just damn cheaper to keep them alive and let them, rot in jail rather than put people to death because of the extra costs going through appeals and those lines. Well, those lines of cost don't intersect for very, very many years behind bars. Most of the time, longer than these people will live on their own.
Well, but Dorf, that has nothing to do with the philosophy behind it.
Oh, you're correct.
In no decent scenario, in no worthwhile scenario, does it cost more to kill an individual than it does to house and feed an individual for decades. The idea that it costs more is a fallacy, B,
if that is truly the case.
No, well, it's a mismanagement of funds or planning, or it's both. Dorf, I will actually, it is a fallacy. Okay. It does cost more, but it doesn't cost the state more. But
you know what? I honestly, I haven't done any. I'm just repeating something I've heard. I haven't looked at those numbers or ran those numbers independently. I will take your word for it.
Yeah, but regardless, that's simply because of mismanagement and bad execution that it even costs more, because a bullet costs 75 cents. So if you really wanted, I promise you, in China, it definitely doesn't cost more to execute someone.
Well, there's not theoretically infinite appeals.
Right. So that's a product of the system, not a product of the idea.
Okay, fair enough.
I like what you're saying with the idea that the state can't sanction death, but you seem to only oppose state sanctioning of lethal force when the lethal force has been completely agreed upon in a fair system such as a trial, as opposed to the lethal use of force in many other ways when it hasn't been approved. I mean, our cops carry guns, right?
Yeah, and you know what? Here's another thing: militarization of police is something else that is worrying to me. Another example that you could recently in the news, you saw some of the lockdown protesters in Texas that were protesting outside a bar that had just reopened against state lockdown order. those guys were rolled up on in an MRAP, a mine-resistant armored personnel carrier. I believe is what that stands for. By police, and the funny meme picture that came out of that, several very overweight officers with plate carriers that don't fit them. Meal Team 6. Those guys are all probably going to spend some time in prison, lose their right to own a firearm within the system of the United States, because you're not allowed to carry a gun in the state of Texas inside on the property of a bar. But they weren't inside the bar; they were outside the bar. But were they even on the property? Is going to be the great debate here that's going to be adjudicated here probably over the next year. I'll be interested to follow that one. The militarization of police is a problem. I understand that you're going to struggle to recruit officers of the law that you're really going to want, that really want to do the job if they're outgunned in any sort of fight. But the idea that an MRAP is needed by a local county sheriff is, quite frankly, preposterous. I understand how they got them. They didn't purchase them directly. It was essentially given to them by the federal government because the federal government bought too many and figured, we might as well make some money back here, and sold them to, state and local sheriffs. I'm not saying that we would need to neuter our police forces in the nation state, myself here, the way that the United Kingdom has, but where there's very select officers who actually carry weapons, where the general constable on patrol doesn't have anything greater than a billy club. I'm not pro that. I'm just flipping the policy in the extreme direction has second and third order consequences that I'm not comfortable with. But at the same time, the way we've done things here in the United States isn't great either.
Okay. What level of violence is acceptable for theft? Somebody stole something.
Things
what
can
level? How should they be punished? What level of violence is acceptable for that?
Settle it through the court system, whether it's restitution or prison time. From a macro perspective, from a micro perspective, things can be replaced. You don't get to kill people because someone took your shit.
All right, so I run into Kroger. No, not Kroger. I run into Steve and Barb's, shop.
Sure.
I don't want to use a big, I run into Steve and Barb's country store, and they got rotisserie chickens going. They look good. They look really good. So I snatch one up. I pretend like I'm walking to the store, and I just make a break for it. Okay. I make a break for it. Are Steve or Barb allowed to shoot me?
No, absolutely not.
Okay, they're not, right? Okay.
No.
I'm with you. I'm with you. This is, it's bad to steal, but the punishment should fit the crime, right?
Yeah. Yes. The price for theft, what amounts to petty theft that you described there, an equal and proportionate response by a state is not allowing the citizen who owned the thing to kill them.
Okay.
It would be a legitimate thing would be apprehension, either hold until law enforcement arrives, or apprehension by law enforcement, and going through that's theft. Property rights are important here, very important. That's another legitimate role of the state, is to protect and ensure property rights, be a neutral arbiter in property disputes. The person there, your remedy and your protection for that is non-governmental. It's insurance. Carry insurance on shit. That'll help you recover the financial value, and quite frankly, if it's something that money can't replace, think about it and securing it a little better.
Okay, so
that would be an individual's responsibility to do so.
I agree completely. Now, I'm now after I ate my chicken. I'm feeling good.
Are you eating your chicken you just stole here?
Yes. I'm eating the chicken. I already ate it. The chicken's gone. I ate it. And I love boats. Okay, I love boats. I love water. I'm an enthusiast, but I don't have any money. I mean, I'm stealing chickens for God's sakes. So I steal somebody's boat, and that person does their due diligence, and they call the police, and they say, this chicken stealing jerk just stole my boat, and they can't prove it, and I get away with the boat, and I don't get prosecuted. I don't get prosecuted. I got away with it.
So
I
the boat is stolen, not returned and unrecoverable. Is that what you're saying?
This is your boat. I stole your boat, Dorf.
You stole my boat. I
stole your boat.
I'm not getting it back.
You're not getting it back.
Okay.
You decide to call up your brother and be like, bro, dude stole my boat. All right, I'm gonna grab the Glock. You guys both, you guys show up. You bring your Glocks with you, and you show up at my place. You say, that was my boat. I'm like, yeah, whatever. And you bust a cap. I mean, you guys just light me up.
Not a legitimate use of force. No, that's something that is not a legitimate, urgent threat of harm. That would be an act of aggression.
Definitely not.
Yeah, settle that. That is a legitimate use of a court system, is to settle that. And at the same time, a boat is not an irreplaceable object like life itself. If you don't like it, carry good insurance, have good locks on stuff.
I agree. And Joe, I don't disagree with you. I agree with you, but philosophy agrees with you, and the law agrees with you, right? I mean,
yeah, the idea that
I
I can go get my next door neighbor Bob and be like, yo Bob, Josh just stole my boat. I know he has my boat. I'm gonna go answer that by killing Josh because his boat's now parked outside his house. My boat is parked outside his house. ID numbers and everything like that match. No, I mean, you could argue that going and taking your boat back but not shooting Josh is potentially legitimate. Repossession of your own property, sure, fine. But if the idea that we get to go kill Josh because he stole my boat is patently ridiculous.
You could even argue that, I stole your boat, I got away with it, it's crap, and you see that I'm really dumb and I leave the keys in my Volkswagen every night.
Yeah.
Well, I go inside and play on your boat.
That doesn't not make it your property. That doesn't mean I get to, I get to take yours. I don't get to take yours in retribution.
But I mean, Blue Book value says
if the court is if you're found guilty in court of stealing my boat and say you sunk my boat after you stole it, it would be a legitimate action of the state to force you to sell your Volkswagen in order to come up with the money to compensate me for my boat.
Why is it legitimate for the state to do it but not for you to do it?
Because the state is the legitimate monopolization of legitimate violence. Violence can be defined as both physical harm and arguably coercion too.
Okay, good. And so we are definitely in agreement that violence is not okay if I stole your boat or I stole a rotisserie chicken. Now instead, okay, none of that stuff happened. But somebody else, not me, not this jerk Josh who keeps stealing everything, but some other guy.
Josh, you're a menace to society. We should probably lock you up.
No, Josh is done. He's gone. He's gone. But now somebody else decides that they're going to steal, I don't know, something just as innocuous. They're going to steal a police car.
Okay.
What's the acceptable level of violence for theft of a police car?
Recover it or insure that shit. Same thing.
But that's not it. But that's not what's going to happen, though, right? What's going to happen is
it's not
10 other cops are going to get in 10 other cop cars, and they're going to chase you down. and
Recover the
you are
property
probably
through state action, or carry better insurance.
but you acknowledge that that isn't what's going to happen, right? And that there is a different standard here. That
I'm not gonna. Okay. The standard shouldn't be different. In reality, that's probably not how it would work. That doesn't make the way it works in reality correct.
right. If I jump in your car and drive away with it as fast as I can, and you and your brother and your dad jump in 3 separate cars with 3 separate guns and chase me down till I either crash it, or you kill me, or you take me in violently, that is not acceptable. But
if I am a non-state actor or not acting in my capacity as law enforcement of the state, that action would be vigilantism, and yes, that would not be a legitimate action. If I am acting in my capacity as an agent of the state to recover the assets of the state, yes, I think that would be illegitimate.
But is that really the best way to recover said assets of the state? Is to jump in some more cars and chase them down and potentially destroy said car in order to catch the person?
If that's a consequent, second and third order consequence of the action of trying it to be recovered, it's an unfortunate outcome. But yes, it's an unfortunate outcome. That doesn't make it the act of trying to recover, a state actor trying to recover property on its own behalf or the behalf of others, an illegitimate action in itself.
So the level of violence that is acceptable for stealing a police car is definitely death. It's definitely death.
It would, okay, so if you want to get in terms of law, it would be unintentional manslaughter is a possible outcome, but murder is not an acceptable one. So there's if you differentiate between unintentional manslaughter and murder, sure.
I'm sorry, Dorf. I'm not going to let you use the state's terms to legitimize the state's actions.
Well, I differ. Then I'm asking you this, Josh. From your perspective, is there any justifiable? Is there any justifiable homicide?
Yes, there is. I think I just laid some out, earlier. Invasion of territory, killing of innocents, murder.
Okay, well, I add even an additional layer of nuance there, that there is a difference between murder and unintentional manslaughter. There is a difference. They both have the same end result for at least one party. That does make them, however, different actions entirely. Just the outcome happens to be the same.
Swerving to miss a squirrel and hitting a pedestrian instead because you didn't have control of your automobile is
vehicular manslaughter. Yes.
Yeah. That is unintentional. That was a mistake that sadly resulted in the death of someone else. Purposely chasing someone in a vehicle in a 3,000-pound weapon down the road at 80 miles an hour, and one of them results in a death, is not the same thing. Just like surrounding someone with guns and then they make a move and you all shoot them is, well, we didn't know if he had a gun. These are very different scenarios than someone regrettably dying on accident.
Okay. I think if we ever want to get anywhere else tonight, we're gonna have to agree to disagree on this one.
Okay, that's
I mean, you have my answer. You just don't like it.
Well, you're right. Dorf, you are right. You are right. And I would ask people to please think about why there's a difference. Think about it philosophically. Here's another example that of what you just asked me. What level of violence is acceptable for rape? I don't want this show to get too intense. But I mean that's one that I can't think of a level of violence that isn't that is too high to combat that.
Saying this from a perspective from somebody who hasn't been, assaulted in that manner himself, or doesn't know anybody who has either, or at least I don't know that they have. It's not been no one that I know, to my knowledge, has been a victim of that. I think it's easy for me to say, well, you do have your life in the end, and the idea of a proportionate response is not murder or execution, or however you want to call it. Retributive murder, execution, but it is a legitimate action of the state to, especially because I'm against, anti-death penalty here, as we've discussed. It is a legitimate action of the state to imprison such person, as there's hardly any more severe violation of your personal autonomy than that. However, it doesn't mean you don't get a trial.
Yeah. So in your mind, the acceptable level of violence for that is lock them in a cage as long as possible.
I don't know it is as long as possible. I think, if we were to switch the goals and philosophies of the United States prison system to rehabilitation, so we actually did set people up for success when they rejoin society instead of punishment, we could go with shorter prison sentences. But until we do switch it to rehabilitation, to being productive members of society instead of punishment, we're going to have to still go with the lock them up and throw away the key idea.
Okay, because that's where I'm at, Dorf. I have no problem with lock them up, throw away the key. Whether it's done by the state or done by, the victim's brother, I have no problem with that whatsoever. What level of violence by the state is acceptable for speeding? You're driving too fast. The speed limit's posted, it's 45. You were doing 58.
Speed limits are dumb. There should be I'm not against the recommended safe speed to traverse this area is X. Exceeding it, any resulting death, destruction, property damage, or anything similar as a result of exceeding speed limit X, I would not be against holding those criminally responsible for that violation. But the way that we do speeding laws now, where it's more of a revenue source than it's in mind for public safety, but we use it as a revenue source. I'm sorry, I don't agree with the way we do it now. The idea of a speed suggestion is more in line with the way I'd like to do things. But if you do exceed it, this is acknowledged that, this is based on at least some sort of data that this is what is necessary to traverse this stretch of road safely. If no one's around and you're not going to, and you don't end up hurting anybody, I don't care. But if you end up exceeding the guideline, I am not afraid to use the power of the state to sue you for everything that you own and garnish all your future earnings because you killed somebody, or or in prison for the violation of somebody else's property rights.
All right, so this I feel like is actually a big credit to your ideology. So you acknowledge this as you think the state
you haven't hurt anybody by the act of speeding.
So you view speed laws as unjust.
Stupid. The idea that if you are recklessly driving for either the road conditions, the road itself, or traffic, and you end up injuring somebody else's life or property, that is something that should be handled civilly or through the civil or criminal law system, not just what do they call that? A civic infraction, where it's just a fine and a point on your license. Like, no, that is just designed to, you were bad, now pay, supplement our tax revenue.
And the issue being, of course, that even though this is a civil infraction, which is below a misdemeanor, which is below a felony, it is still, with the way our system works, it is still punishable by the most extreme forms of violence should you should you execute anything improperly along the way. Should you not pull over immediately? Should you not, go by
quite
the
honestly, like that level of traffic enforcement. Here's another thing in traffic law, if we want to get nitpicky: speed cameras and red light cameras are violations of the Fourth Amendment. Goodbye.
I agree. I agree with you completely. I do. Oh, okay.
No one just has the balls to challenge that in court over what amounts to probably a $200 speeding ticket.
And when people do, it doesn't seem to work out for us. We have this good system here in the U.S. where we can supposedly combat these things, but it really isn't a very good system. It's certainly
it's just like any sort of intellectual property law. It's the state will not enforce. It will enforce the intellectual property on your behalf, but it's your job to enforce. At least bring it up. They're not going to do it for you.
I mean, let's be real, Dorf. The idea of the speed trap. We all see them all the time. It's 40. It's 45, and then it drops to 25, and shoots right back up to 45, or it comes in off a hard right turn where you're still doing 30 off the turn, but then you're turning onto a street where the speed limit's 25. This has been ruled as unconstitutional. They've called that entrapment, which is unconstitutional, but they've never stopped doing it.
Well, it's up to you as the person injured by the unconstitutional act to challenge it through the court system, and/or having the bigger federal agency challenge that on your behalf. So,
and then what good is it? What good is a right if it's not a right? What good is a right?
You have to be willing to step up and challenge for it. It's not free.
But not just willing, you have to be able, because there's a lot of people out there who are willing, but
that's a whole different argument. That's a barrier to that you're getting into an argument here over barriers to financial barriers to justice, and that's a whole different box of rocks. We could do that show. It's just we don't got enough time for that.
You're right, and perhaps we should do that show. Okay, what level of violence is acceptable for the expiration of a license? I mean, you already proved that you could drive, but your license is expired. You already proved and took all the safety measures to get a concealed pistol license, but it has expired. You already bought your dog and named it, but you didn't renew the license. What is the acceptable level of violence for the terrible crime of allowing a license to expire?
Licensure laws, generally speaking, especially those of the occupational realm, are generally speaking bullshit. I understand why you want to have a licensed doctor. However, you could handle that by having a third party or multiple third party accreditation agencies that, handle that, licensure at a private level where, if, we only employ doctors certified by the ABCD Foundation or whatever. And the ABCD Foundation's accreditation standards are public and those records are auditable. And you essentially, as a doctor would have to, display your ABCD card or your XYZ card, or, you belong to this accreditation agency. You see that sort of accreditation system work in education where, if you go to a non-accredited university, you might as well not even have bothered. Your degree isn't worth the paper it's written on. Whereas if you acknowledge that you're going to it, that you're going to an unaccredited doctor, that would be your duty to check on if they have accreditations and what that means, or unaccredited lawyer, yada yada, et cetera, et cetera. That's on you, buddy. You know, if you want to use your buddy you met in jail as your attorney in your next criminal case, more power to you. He should be allowed to practice law. It's your own dumb fault.
You should, but you can't though, right?
Yeah, you should. Well, what I'm saying is because licensure laws are protectionist, rent-seeking bullshit. That sort of behavior is I understand why it's in place, but I don't view it as a legitimate action of the state. Licensure. Now, at the same time, to answer your question, level of violence to enforce somebody not having a driver's license, none. That's something that if you want to have the concept of licensed drivers, which is a debatable competency test and doesn't even do anything, you could handle that with essentially through the insurance process. If you're going to require people to have insurance, or you can, if there can be some third party test that they can take for a discount on their insurance. I don't, but to say, is it okay to murder somebody because they don't have their driver's license is expired? No, absolutely not. Unacceptable.
Is it okay to lock them in a cage though?
I see, like I said, Josh, I don't see whether it's occupational licensing, specifically like barbering license. I understand there is some risk that like barbering or beauty chemicals, if mixed improperly, you can like burn your head off, burn your hair off. I can understand that. That's why licenses are in place for such businesses there. I still think there's a better way to handle that. Whereas if you fuck up in your barber, you better, better get prepared to pay up because you've caused great bodily harm to somebody. That'll take care of that. People being incompetent and not knowing what they're doing. I don't see that licensing is period a legitimate action of the state in 99% of cases, including driver's licenses.
Okay. No, I mean, okay, here's one. Here's kind of a fun example. This is one that, and I'm anxious to say this, but I want to come clean. And this is a law that I'm breaking. This next one. This is one that I'm breaking for this reason, for this little fun experiment. But what level of violence is acceptable for someone not filling out their census form?
None.
Because I'm just curious because I refuse to fill mine out, and I originally just didn't want to because I didn't want to. No great reason, and now I keep getting letters in the mail telling me that I have to. It's the law, and that they're going to send someone to my house to fill it out in person if I keep refusing to send it in. And
Are you going to answer the door with? Are you going to answer the door with come back with a warrant? I'd be so proud of you if you did.
I want to invite them in. I want to invite them in and offer them a cup of coffee and ask them the question, what level of violence is acceptable for me not filling out my census form? Because I want to know. I truly want to know what.
Josh, you're gonna make that poor census taker who's working for like $10 an hour on a contract cry. I don't know, sir. I just need you to fill this out.
So it's okay. So this is good, but in theory, though, I can be taken away in handcuffs eventually for not filling out my census.
Is that the way it works? I don't know. I don't know that that's the way it works. Like, is that really what could happen?
It's the law. It is the law. So if I refuse to do it, they can knock down my front door. And they can send men with guns to my home, and they can come in.
Well, how do they square that circle with being allowed to sample and sampling date? Doing sampling instead of full door by door counts. I wonder how they square that circle then.
Well, I mean, it doesn't seem like they do a very good job of this entire process.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to admit I'm undereducated in that department, and I'm gonna have to say, interesting. Didn't know that. Don't agree with it if it's the way you've described it.
What level of violence is acceptable for tax evasion?
Um, I wouldn't say that it's I'm not in favor of locking up tax debtors, people who don't pay taxes. But at the same time, if you're going to refuse to pay the legal prescribed share, then I'm going to enforce not with by murder, but by through a law enforcement slash a court system. I'm not going to allow you to access things that are taxpayer funded. Like if your house burns down and you didn't pay your local taxes or whatever. Sorry, the fire department will make sure your neighbors' houses don't burn down. Or if somebody has committed property crime upon you, sorry, you didn't pay your local taxes to fund the police department. You don't get access to these services. From a state or federal perspective, roads. Sorry, you don't get to drive on the roads without paying, your state taxes, or you don't get to send your kids to school, the locally funded school, public school, because you didn't pay your taxes. I'm okay if you don't want to pay them, and you're fully willing to live off the grid. Fine, whatever. I'm also against as a just a general tax scheme. I'm against property taxes. Period. I like use taxes that only punishes or revenue turns into a source of revenue, economic activity. It doesn't then like income taxes and property taxes doesn't punish or disincentivize being economically productive.
Dorf, I got to tell you, I love your answer. I absolutely love your answer.
If you want to not part, I have no problem with folks that like you look at the folks that live at Cement or Slab City in the desert in California, because that's like the last uninhabited. That's not uninhabited, but like unincorporated commune in North America. If that's what you want to do, go nuts. Just don't expect me to support you as a state.
Dorf, I love your answer.
No free rides here. No free lunches.
I wish that that's how any system anywhere in the world handled it, because it's not. And there's actually a whole lot of people out there who, if given the opportunity, believe it or not, would do exactly what you just said. And
it's very much I'm a very big proponent of actions have consequences. You've chosen to, in exchange for not paying, not being able to participate, and you don't get to say in an emergency scenario, I regret my decision, can I please have it now? No free riders. You chose not to participate, you don't get to say oops, my bad anymore and get instant access to services.
I believe I said this in the last podcast too, but that's very Robert Heinlein of you, and I do appreciate it. I love.
Great. Now everybody who's only seen Heinlein and never read his stuff is going to call me a fucking fascist now. Thanks, dude.
No, the movie of Starship Troopers had.
It's a terrible adaptation of the book. It's absolutely terrible.
Absolutely, and I like that movie because hey, the only good bug is a dead bug. It's fun, but no, it has nothing to do with the book whatsoever. Now, Robert Heinlein, brilliant writer. But the thing is, like you mentioned, you don't pay taxes, your kids can't go to school. Okay, but you know what the problem with that is?
Sure, go ahead.
Education is compulsory. You're not allowed.
I disagree that compulsory education is I don't think that we should, as a state, should be in the business of compulsory education. At the same time, if like you're a minor and you reach maturity and your parents refuse to send you to school or didn't send you to school, you should be able to sue them for future financial harm of, if the effective minimum barrier to entry is a high school education or a GED, to even work at McDonald's at this point, or at least be working on that if you're a minor still, and your parents refuse to give you access to that, and you cannot get gainful employment, I do believe you should be able to sue them for that. They don't get immunity from that.
That's fine, I guess. I mean, good luck with that.
Oh yeah, that sounds, yeah. That I am fully willing to admit that is not a well thought out. I have not thought of the second or third order consequences of that latest proclamation here.
I would love to be the lawyer of the parent that gets sued by that kid. I mean, I'm an unlicensed lawyer, of course, so I'm not allowed to do it. But I'll murder that kid and his lawyer because.
Well, and at the same time, like if we want to make like a 3-tiered, you have the minors and full blown adults. If you want to make some sort of third tier status where somewhere in between, where a minor isn't fully emancipated but has some more decision making rights on their own, where they can go get that education themselves or force that way into themselves, but still their parents still retain some rights over them. I wouldn't be against that as a way to get there, to avoid the, I reached my 18th birthday, you didn't let me go to school, now you owe me for the rest of my life, essentially lost wages.
No, I'm with you, Dorf. But I got to tell you, as a father of 4, if the government told me, Josh, if you don't pay your taxes, your kids can't go to public school, I would say, you promise? I mean, talk about a win-win. I don't have to pay taxes, and my kids don't have to go to your compulsory indoctrination centers. Sign me up right now. Sign me up. I am with you 100%. Dorf, some of my questions I'm crossing off here because
I'm answering them.
Yeah, you are. I mean, or if you're not answering them directly, you're making it very clear. I know how you are going to feel about the improper registration of your pet.
Oh yeah, the idea that I need to register and pay a tax on my pet. Yes, it's only $15 or whatever, probably for a 3-year license, but really? Nuh-uh. No. That is a bridge too far.
And not driving a motorcycle without an endorsement, even though you have a driver's license and you know how to drive a motorcycle. I mean, the fact that you got pulled over doing 75.
Here's another way we could do it. If we could still have a driver's license per se, whereas it's essentially if you drive without a license or whatever, there's a different fine or fee schedule if for reckless behavior or property destruction. That there's like a multiplier on it if you didn't take a basic awareness and or safety course or something like that. There's like a multiplier on your penalties for property or destruction of life.
Well, what is ludicrous about this idea is that you just got pulled over for doing 55 and a 40 on a motorcycle, but you don't have your motorcycle tag, which means you don't know how to drive a motorcycle.
Obviously, you do. You were pilot. You got here, right?
Exactly. This is my point. Obviously, you know how to drive a motorcycle. You've been so basically what they're saying is you're approved to drive the 3,000-pound weapon, but not the 700-pound weapon. Yeah. Is what they're saying. I don't know. I mean, I'm certainly not a pro, but for those people out there who've driven a motorcycle, they know that if you don't know how to drive a motorcycle,
you fall over pretty quick.
Okay, sounds good. All right, I'm gonna lump some together here. What is the level of violence acceptable for hunting an animal on your property when it's not the season? Doing some fishing on your property when it isn't the proper season? Collecting rainwater? Or let's also throw in possessing a firearm. Peaceful.
Your own property. There should be no restrictions if you own the land. It is a legitimate use of the purpose of it's your property. Harvesting its natural resources, such as like mineral rights, is a legitimate function. I would consider the deer population of your property a legitimate, natural resource of it. Take them all if you want. Hunt them to extinction. That's your choice. Waterways get a little bit more tricky because they're generally speaking not stagnant. So you shouldn't be able to dump water, toxins into your part of the stream because it very quickly becomes somebody else's part of the stream. Unless, of course, you could get everybody down the line, which, all the way through wherever it terminates, and anybody whose land touches where it terminates to agree that, dumping this stuff here is cool. And anybody whose water table connects, if you can get 100% agreement, fine, go nuts. But in practical reality, that ain't happening. Owning a gun is, I would argue, I'm a very big fan of amendment number 2 here. I think that is every responsible citizen is a well-armed one, well-armed and well-trained in its use. I do recognize
training to be compulsory.
No.
Okay.
That is not, if you were to do a strict interpretive reading of the Second Amendment, no part of that includes you being trained on it. I think it's a good idea, personally. I'm just not going to say you can't purchase this or make your own, even, you 3D print your own, if you don't have training. I'm not willing to go that far. Am I forgetting anything here in your question? It was like a 4-parter.
No, actually, I don't think you are.
Here's the one thing I will say
collecting
about
rainwater. Collecting rainwater was a part of it.
Oh,
as well.
That's stupid. Of course, do whatever you want with that. It fell from the sky. It landed on your property. You do you. The collection of rainwater doesn't hurt anybody. The one more thing I want to say on guns. I do say, as part of a criminal punishment, like I said, a punishment for lack of following the rules of the state is a legitimate action of the state. Loss of firearms rights is a possibility for that, especially if you have proven to not be unwilling to use them in offensive, if you use them in illegitimate offensive violence, and you don't end up dead, I think a loss of firearms rights is a legitimate action. The idea that if I commit wire fraud, that means I can't, and I do my time for it, or if I commit a white collar crime or petty theft, that to the point I shouldn't lose my firearms rights for that. It's one thing if I have a violent felony, if we need to make a fourth additional class of crime for violence, that we would lose firearms rights because of that. I'm cool with that, but not the way we do it now.
What if you've committed no crime, but you have at some point been deemed unstable?
Nope.
Okay. So you
not okay. That is not a legitimate revocation of rights.
Okay. So you told when you were 16, you told your therapist that you were suicidal, and now you're 33 and you
don't even need to finish your example. Nope, not a legitimate use of state action.
Okay. Because that is a state action that is.
Oh, I know it happens. It happens now, and it's terrible. The amount of time, effort, and money you need to spend to get that overturned, if you can do it at all. But in my opinion, that is not a. The state doesn't have a necessary right to protect me from myself. If they're worried about me offing myself, well, I'll find another way to do it.
Sure. Okay. This is one of my favorites, and I know we're running short here. But here's one of my favorites. This thing that people love to use as an example all the time, and I don't know. I'm not even certain that it's ever actually happened in human history. But you just yelled fire in a movie theater. What is the acceptable level of violence?
And there's no fire.
There's no fire.
I would. So this is a specific example. You yell fire at a crowded theater. There is no fire. The business, the movie theater, should be able to sue you for lost revenue, including penalty modifiers for loss of consumer confidence because of loss of future business, not just business that time because people are afraid to come back. That we would need to find some way to prove and quantify that. I don't know how that would work, but we will establish that standard.
That could be done through witnesses, actually, pretty easily.
Individuals can sue the offending party for pain and suffering, anguish, and so. But what I'm saying, I don't think for your specific example there's a criminal element to that. That doesn't mean that there isn't a civil element to that where, monetary compensation may be owed to multiple parties for that illegitimate action.
For an issue that arose.
I'm not throwing you in jail for it, but that doesn't mean that about 17 different people can't seek financial remedy.
Okay. Dorf, I agree with you. The Supreme Court does not.
Well, that's hooey.
Yeah. Okay. We've mentioned insurance a little bit in this show. Insurance is a good idea, right? I mean, it gives you insurance, right? The name is right in the definition of it. But I always like to say that when insurance of any point becomes compulsory, then it ceases being insurance and becomes a tax. So what is the proper level of violence for not having compulsory, let's say, car insurance?
Well, compulsory car insurance is a great example here. I now live in grew up in a state where car insurance is compulsory, to a ridiculous level. I now live in a state where it is not. It is compulsory. However, like the minimum threshold of coverage is so low, you might as well not even have it. I've also been and traveled frequently into a state where it's not required. The best way to do it is it's not required, but you should, instead of insuring, other people's stuff in an example, a no fault state, insure your own shit. If I get in an accident with you, I'm insuring my own vehicle. I don't owe you a damn dime, regardless of whether I'm at fault or not. If you'd like to, if there's, blatant reckless behavior and you want to go after me in civil court for additional, costs, that remedy exists and should exist. But the idea that I need to insure both yours and mine, there's so many variables in that it's fucking ridiculous. Compulsory insurance in general, not okay with that. That is, once again, like I said, with like licensure, that's rent-seeking bullshit. And while good intentioned, it ends up being a lose-lose for everybody.
Right on. All right, I got a couple more. I'll rock through them as fast as I can. What level of violence is acceptable for selling loose cigarettes?
The only people, if you were worried about, loose cigarettes, none. A specific example of a cigarette is you are responsible for whatever you ingest. I'm okay with the legalization of any and all drugs. However, the similar example of like the speed guidelines example, that if you're, here's the suggested guidance. If you exceed that, you're on your own. Same thing with like drugs or loose cigarettes or unregulated pharmaceuticals.
Okay.
You knew that. Hang on. Let me finish this.
Okay, sure.
You knew the risks. We informed you of the risks. You chose to do it anyway. Don't expect my help with any of the consequences of that.
Oh, no one's asking for that. No one's asking for that.
If Bob wants to sell a loose cigarette or one he grew at home or whatever to Phil, whatever, man, you do you. If Phil gets poisoned, that's his own fault for accepting a cigarette from Bob that he didn't know what was in it.
Okay, but you're selling loose cigarettes right out of the Marlboro pack. You bought a pack of Marlboros and now you're selling them. That's not punishable by being strangled to death by a New York cop?
No, absolutely not.
Okay, because that happened. Of course,
Yes,
right?
it did. I forget the guy's name, but he was a very large gentleman and actually had a heart attack, likely induced by the restriction of airflow, because he was a very, very large dude. I forget his name.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so what is the? Let's go jaywalking.
You don't cause harm to property or somebody else's life, whatever.
Shouldn't even be illegal, right?
The only reason it really is illegal now was a way to escalate or to get the ruffians off the street. It's a remnant of that era where police were used in a authoritarian fashion to remove the undesirables from downtown so we don't have to see the ruffians. It was a way that, oh, we caught you jaywalking. I forget, wasn't it slang for the Irish at one point? If I remember correctly.
I think
it was
so.
just a way to have the police be able to remove the undesirables, and it's never been gotten rid of, and jaywalking specifically, that is. And that would not be a legitimate action of police power.
Okay. How about not obeying an executive order? I mean, this wasn't legislated. This was so say we lived in like a really totalitarian country.
I would here's
like the governor came out and said like you're not allowed to leave your house.
That's the country we live in now.
Like you're not allowed to leave your house, or you're not allowed to go to the grocery store without wearing a mask, or something crazy like that. What should the punishment be for disobeying that? I mean, it's not legislated; it's just an executive order.
Well, to get to the root of what you're saying here, the idea of an executive order, I'm okay with the concept of an executive order existing. It should be something that, like, in an emergency basis, it has a finite expiration date, very short term, and if you don't get it passed through the legislation by the end of the expiration date, say 2 weeks, then you don't get to extend it. Too bad, so sad. It's over, and you can't reinstate it for 6 months, a year, 3 months, and a large amount of time to prevent exactly what you've seen, like in your state, where we're gonna lock you down even longer now because somebody protested. You protested. I'm gonna teach you a lesson. That kind of behavior is just insane. Have you said your Heil Gretchens today?
Yeah.
The action of an executive order, I still say has a legitimate place in a statist society. However, very firm time limitations need to be imposed on that, and the level of violence associated with being able to enforce that in a time of peace would be the civil it'll be a civil infraction system where it'll be ticket and we'll see you in court. In your mask example, it's ticket, we'll see you in court, and unfortunately we're gonna have to ask you to go home or acquire one. Or even if even in the mask example is, well, I can't afford one, well then here you go, here's one, continue going about your day. But at the same time, in a wartime example where it's we're going to pass an executive order that you can't use a skybound strobe light to signal, to say, please bomb here, so you don't have to go, bomb my Ford plant so you can't go and don't have to go to work tomorrow. Banning that activity and using that's an oddly specific example, but using state, powers of coercion and violence to enforce that in a wartime scenario, I think is a legitimate action, But you understand what I'm saying, though. There's difference and nuance in the level here and the way we've used executive decrees here lately. And here's another thing: county health officials who nobody votes for, being able to essentially declare executive decrees, that needs to end. That's crazy. Nobody voted for them. The remedy for people not, there is no way to remove them if they don't like them.
Sure. Okay. I mean, Dorf, I have two left. I saved these last two, for a reason. But I have two left. But it sounds to me like you are a believer in statism, and that you want there to be statism, and that you think it is a justifiable way to rule people. But according to you, the system of statism we have here in the U.S. really sucks. I mean,
I wouldn't say that it sucks. That's very much binary language. I would say the United States specifically, you can pick out random, points in any sort of establishment of the United States that somebody else does better. But when you put them all together, I don't think anybody in the world does it better than here. That doesn't mean it's perfect. That doesn't mean it's great. Just comparatively so, I think we do the best job on the planet and in the history of civilization. That doesn't make it great. That
I
makes
agree
it
with
the
you.
best we've
that
got.
wasn't the question. I agree with you, but that definitely was not the question. It wasn't the statement. Just because.
Ask again. Force me into an answer.
Just because our place is better, it's better to live here than it is the vast majority of places in all of human history, doesn't mean it's good. It really doesn't.
But in the idea of I'll take it over the alternative, that doesn't mean I don't want to keep moving towards I still think a nation state is a good idea. I think we can adopt and incorporate more freedom and liberty-minded principles. We have the mechanisms in place within the current system to do that, and we should try and do that. But at the same time, if we rip the Band-Aid off and go total libertarian super state here, we'll get conquered in about 20 minutes. And that's not good for anybody involved. You get your 20 seconds of freedom, and then you get to lick the boot of China, the mega corporation, here very quickly.
Well, I think you're, I hate to get overly ideological, but I think you're maybe misusing the word libertarian there a little bit.
Fair enough.
Because, like me, for instance, I am a libertarian, a small L libertarian.
Well, okay, let me
substitute. Party.
Let me substitute that with anarchy. Go ahead.
I would love to be an anarchist, and that doesn't mean I like violence or like chaos or something. If that's what you think, I'm talking to the people listening here, not you. If that's what you think anarchy means, you definitely need to look into it. I would love to be a full-out anarchist, but the idea that I'm a libertarian and a person who votes for the Libertarian Party in the United States means that I actually am kind of a statist too. I'm actually. I haven't given up completely on the system. I think it's really lousy. But the idea that I'm saying that means that I actually am still supporting the system and believe that it has an opportunity and has a chance to make it better, to improve within the system itself. Otherwise, I wouldn't be voting libertarian. I'd be blowing up Capitol buildings or something, or I would just be a complete fringe person. But that's not it. So libertarianism is a way to win the day within the system of statism, if you will.
Okay, fair enough.
I'll throw out the last two real quick. What level of violence is acceptable for resisting arrest?
Equal. If arrest is okay, so here's the thing. Arrest means entry into the justice system. if you're being wrongly arrested, you've been wrongly accused, or you're not guilty of what's alleged, you still have a remedy for that. The act of the idea of my arrest is illegitimate, therefore I can whack a cop or whack the agent of the state coming to arrest me, that means, quite honestly, that proportional violence can be used against you, up and including your death, if you resist violently, if you would violate the right to life of somebody else. When there's another remedy available, there is another remedy available.
What if you're just trying to get away?
I shouldn't be able to shoot you in the back. We'll get you. You'll just get arrested tired. That's not that you'll just, no point in running. You'll just die tired. To modify that, there's no point in running. You'll just get caught tired. You still have a remedy to rectify your injustice, and the idea that, I am fully and totally pro. If the state arrests you and it turns out you're not guilty, or they wrongfully arrested you, that you should be compensated for that. Not just, you're our bad, you're free to go. No, well, you get to compensate me for my time and, my potential loss to reputation if this was witnessed publicly, or anybody saw it, it was recorded and distributed. You get to now compensate me for that. And I think that would be a something that would really, really, really force the law enforcement and justice system to really make sure they have their ducks in a row and not do what you're seeing now. You're not going to, the idea that that they get just to say, well, we took it back. Sorry, you're free to go, and not be compensated for your time or loss to reputation. That is not okay. It should be automatic, not something you have to fight for.
Well, that'd be better than what it is. I mean, I don't believe that really any level of violence is acceptable for the resisting of violence. I believe you're the one that the arresters are the ones who are the perpetrators of the violence. So
well,
it should be expected
if the idea, okay, an arrest is a legitimate police power. Your remedy for wrongful arrest is still available to you if you're arrested. The idea that is an assault on your life, I don't think that's the case. If you violently resist arrest and put somebody else's life at risk, whether it's a bystander or the person who's acting on legitimate behalf of the state, then proportional responses are warranted. And warranted, acceptable, and allowable. How do I want to say this? You don't just, if somebody's fleeing you, you don't get to run them over with your car, your cop car. You don't get to shoot them in the back. You don't get to shoot somebody who's, fleeing is not a death sentence. If you run away, running away, isn't good, doesn't mean the arresting state official gets to become your executioner.
I agree with you. I don't know how many cops agree with you, but I do. Okay, one more, Dorf. What? Okay, now I know everyone says, all right, Josh, you're a jerk, you're an anarchist. If you don't like it here, just leave. Just get out of here. What are you doing here? You said yourself.
You don't like it, you can get out.
Exactly. That's right, Dorf. And you said yourself, this place may not be perfect, but it beats the alternative. Beats all the other places. Well, maybe I want to try the alternative. Maybe I'm trying to follow your rules, and I don't like it here, so I'm gonna get out. I'm gonna get on out of here. I don't like it here in America anymore. So, what level of violence is acceptable for attempting to leave without a passport?
There should be no violence for leaving without a passport, or if you can prove you are legitimately allowed to return. that doesn't mean if I
Why do
am.
you want to return though? Why do you want to return? I don't
Well,
want to return.
I'm just saying in general. I'm just saying in general here. The idea of having to have a passport to leave, I find unconscionable. I could say that I don't want people who, foreign aliens entering without proper passport and or visa documentation. I'm okay with that. You want to, this is your house per se, and you want to, be allowed to say who's allowed to come over for dinner, or if you want to take on a roommate or not. But the idea that you have to have a passport to leave, I don't find that agreeable.
Yeah, but
that doesn't mean wherever you're going has to allow you in either.
Sure, but when government has a monopoly on travel and on land,
they shouldn't. They do currently, but they shouldn't.
You're not allowed to land. You're not allowed to leave. You aren't allowed to leave. And I think people should know that. The idea that greatest part about America is if you don't like it here, you can get out.
Well, here's the thing, Josh. I don't agree with your assessment that you're not allowed to leave. It's just wherever you end up might not let you stay.
I'm not allowed to leave. I know that. I can tell you personally. I don't have a passport, and I am not allowed to leave. That is that, and there's a lot of people like that in this country.
Well, I mean, you could leave. That doesn't mean your actions wouldn't be frowned upon, especially if you just walked across the Canadian border per se, or swam the Detroit River. Good luck with that, by the way. It's a lot further than it looks, and
yeah, I bet.
That doesn't mean if you cross the Canadian border from Michigan, up in the Upper Peninsula or something like that, doesn't mean Canada's going to let you stay. But the idea that you can't leave, it's not the action that either one of the states leaving is not the action that they have a problem with. It's being allowed to stay where you end up.
Right. Well, I mean, but that's kind of like saying
it's a distinction. It's a distinction without a difference, practically. But you know what I'm saying.
That's like saying you're allowed to kill people if you don't get caught.
Well, I mean, practicality, you kind of are. You're allowed to. You're allowed to speak. What you're saying, right? What you're saying is you're allowed to sneak across the border, and if you don't get caught, then you don't get caught. But it is still, what you're doing is still illegal. Correct.
Not getting caught does not equal legality.
Correct.
Okay. So, Dorf, I want to tell you, I'm out of questions. I want to tell you, I really like your answers. I do. I really appreciate your answers. I liked how candid you were. I hope people listening, came up with their own answers, or did it, if nothing else, it just kind of made them think. Because I tried not to jump in too much with my own ideology, which I realize is fringe to a lot of people. But the main idea I was trying to push here, and you gave better answers than I thought you were going to give good answers, but you gave even better answers than I thought you would. But the problem I have with all these is that the truth be told, in any governmental system, all of these things, all of these crimes can and sometimes do equal death.
That is the unfortunate. You're right, Josh. You're right. That's the unfortunate reality of the situation. That doesn't necessarily mean that that's the way it was designed or the way it should be. That's just an unfortunate outcome of the way things are. It's not the way. That doesn't mean that was the way that they were supposed to be.
Okay, but I do. Yeah, you're right. You're right. And well, that's when you're towing the party line. And I know you are, and I appreciate that, then you are right. But everything I mentioned, the acceptable level of violence for every one of those things is death. And my reason being that because law cannot exist without the full threat of violence behind it.
You're correct.
Full threat of violence and death behind it. And I think people need to know that. And I appreciate that you, as a proud statist, at least acknowledge that and agree with it. Because there's a whole bunch of people out there that when I say things like that law cannot exist without the full threat of death and violence behind it, they will disagree with me forever. Just like when I say...
And for that reason right there, you've just summarized essentially my argument against anarchism. Like, without that threat and monopolization of and up to violence to force compliance, your civilizations pretty much will end at 2 people. That'll be your largest group gathering allowable, because anything over 2, good luck settling disagreements in any other way that doesn't involve, violence.
I will say this, and I don't have a whole lot more to add after this. If you want to wrap up, if not, that's fine too. But I will say this: I'm sitting in the catbird seat in this conversation, because we don't know if what you said is true, because your way has a monopoly on how the world works. So I can talk about how I don't think that's true. I don't think that is true of anarchism or of strict liberty. But we know we know what I said is true. We do know that what I've said about the violence of statism is true. We don't know if anarchy would be the way you say it is, because we've never tried it as a civilized society.
Well, not in recorded history anyway.
Well, I'm not much interested in anything
primitive anarchism. Yeah, and back when there was like 10,000 people on the planet. Yeah. All right, I think that's going to do it tonight, man. It's been an hour and 42 minutes.
Way too long, but it was good. I hope people enjoy it.
Yep, so I think that is going to wrap us up here tonight. Episode 2 of the Empire in Exile podcast. You can find us each and every Tuesday, wherever you're finding us now. The list of platforms you can find us on is growing by the day. We added SoundCloud today, hoping to add Spotify, Google Play Music, and Apple iTunes here shortly. So with that in mind, I have been your host, Dorf, and for Josh Houselander, this has been, once again, the second episode of Empire in Exile. We'll catch you all next time.